Hi, welcome back. Barbara happened to ask the perfect question for my next set of slides. I'd like to show you what we see when we're in the cath lab. And this is an actual x-ray picture. I used my iPhone to take it off of our screen. This is our tube right here coming down from the right arm into the opening of the left coronary artery. The artery looks black because the contrast media that we inject doesn't allow x-rays to penetrate it. So if I can get this little pointer up, here's a normal looking artery. It looks nice and wide open. But if you look right here, the artery looks like somebody pinched it. And that's the plaque. That's what a plaque of cholesterol looks like. We call this an atherosclerotic plaque. The artery then opens up and looks pretty normal. This is another artery that the angle that we took doesn't show it as well. I wanted to show this blockage very specifically. After we fix it with a stent, here's what it looks like now, if I can get this little pointer up. So now the blockage is completely gone, the artery looks fine. And that's what we see when we're in the left coronary artery. When we're in the right coronary artery, this right here is just a bend, but if you look down here, you can see how narrow the artery is right here. That's all atherosclerotic plaque. You can see it's a little narrowed here, and almost completely blocked there. So this is a little more complex to fix, but when we get done, that's what it looks like. We have a stent here, we have a stent that runs from here to here, and we have another stent that runs from here to here. So now we have, again, an artery that looks perfectly fine with good blood flow. And to go back to the question of people having multiple stents performed, someday this blockage might get bad enough to stent. It might not. There might be blockages like that in other blood vessels that are not bad enough to fix that someday may need to be fixed in the future. The odds of somebody coming back to the cath lab with a recurrent problem is much higher for new disease than disease where we fix. The nice thing about this procedure is the patient gets the same advantage as having a bypass, except the patient is walking back to their room and driving home 3 hours later. So, but remember, this is an ongoing disease that requires a lot of risk factor management.
I have questions about this because let's go back to the slide. And let's pull that slide. Okay, why do we have so much curvature in the artery going around there versus having, like, I mean, I know it's the human body, but what creates such a huge curvature to go that far around?
You're talking like this.
Yes.
Well, the heart looks like, if you could see a heart, the heart looks like a football with the top cut off. So it's shaped. The heart has that shape to it. Mm-hmm. So this artery happens to run around the heart circularly like this. All right. And on this view, it looks like it's going around in a big circle, but actually the heart's not square.
Okay.
The heart's round.
It's just round there.
And
okay.
So what you're looking at is lines on a circle, mm-hmm. in which you're looking at the circle in different angles. So while this looks like huge curves that we can't get around, it's actually a very gradual curve, like the curve in a road. And it's not common that we can't get to these with our stents.
What can we do to avoid plaque buildup in our body?
I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to show some more slides. Okay. But the answer is, do everything today that you always vow to do tomorrow. Because everybody knows what it is, and everyone says, well, I'm trying, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it on New Year's, I'll do it after my daughter gets married. You just got to be smart. You maintain your weight where you should, you eat what you should. Weight's a huge thing because of diabetes. Mm-hmm. Let us treat your cholesterols if they're high. Don't be afraid of the drugs are safe. Taking care of blood pressure is very important, and just leading an active, normal life. And once that's done, don't worry about it.
There, you know, when we go to school, we never learn exactly what to eat in life. You learn as you go. You learn from your parents. I mean, how do you really get a good understanding of nutrition and what you should be eating and what you should not be eating?
I would like to that's a talk of its own.
Okay.
And I'd love to give something about that, but I'd like to continue with this a little bit if I could.
Yeah, not a problem. Well, tell me a little bit more then about the fact the transradial process versus going up through the growing, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, and now you actually did some studies on this and did some teaching, I believe, in Vietnam?
No, well, I was supposed to. About 3 years ago, I went over with a large non-government organization that does a lot of medical work as well as agricultural and financial work in Vietnam. They've been going there for about 20 years or so. And I went over under the auspices of an experienced angiographer to help the Vietnamese do angiograms in their cath labs. And at that point, I didn't know how to do radial. I'm good from the groin. And I walked into a cath lab in a public hospital in Hanoi, and they were doing everything radial. The patients were walking in literally from outside the hospital, weren't even changing into hospital garb. They would take off their sandals, lay down on the table, put their arm out, have their angiogram, have their stent. They would get up, put their shoes on, and walk out of the hospital. So they asked me very nicely, because they're Asian and very, very respectful, whether I would like to do a case. I had never done one or seen one at that point in my life. And until I embarrassed myself sufficiently, I played around with the catheters, and then I watched them for 2 weeks. They were superb. What they needed from us were academic lectures, which was because they had full house staff training programs over there. But watching them in the cath lab and watching their facility in doing it and watching the comfort and ease to the patient was really an eye-opener for me. And when I came back here, I always told myself I should do it, like I say I should go to the gym and lose weight and everything else. And about 1.5 years ago, I committed myself to doing it, and I decided that I wanted to be good enough to be able to teach it to other people. I wanted to be comfortable doing this in the cath lab. And so since the beginning of 2013, I've done every case I possibly could radially, including grafts and valves and everything else. The patients absolutely love it. It's wonderful for the patient. It's been enjoyable to me because it's been a challenge.
Is it less invasive?
It's equally invasive because we're going to the same place.
Yeah, right.
But that's an academic answer. From a practical answer, it's much less invasive because of complications that we have in the groin. And if any of you watching television have been done from the groin, have had a bleed from the groin or a pseudoaneurysm and have had to go to surgery to have the artery in the groin fixed, or even have just had a stent from the groin where you're at bed rest from anywhere from 3 to 4 to 8 to 10 hours, not being able to move and having to spend the night, it's a huge difference.
Okay.
The first transradials were done in the 1980s in France, and it was shown to be effective. The first interventions, balloons and stents, were done about a decade later. And if you look at the names, you'll see they're not American names. First one's French, second one is Dutch. In fact, one of my partners went to learn transradial, and he did much better than I did. He went to Amsterdam, and I went to Little Rock, Arkansas. And while I had a great teaching experience in Little Rock, Arkansas, I think he probably had a better experience in Amsterdam. He told me that in Amsterdam, in fact, when the patients were done, they would not even go to a recovery area. They would go down to the cafeteria. The cardiologist would come and join them for a cup of coffee, and they'd talk about what they did. It's that informal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So.
If we did that in America, boy, can you imagine what would happen?
Well, we're starting.
Are we?
We're starting to.
Are we going to do that?
We're starting to.
Okay.
Right now, I have my patients that don't get intravenous analgesia in the cath lab. I have them walk back to the room. And then everyone keeps them around. Initially, it was done in this country in patients in which we had trouble getting into the groin. Because remember, we do everything from the groin here. So if the person has blocked arteries down there and we can't get in, if they can't lay down in bed, if they're in excessive bleeding risk, or if they're really obese, we would do them from the arm, and would usually stick. If you could put me on instead of.
Yep. Come back.
We usually stick this area up in here in the old days. In fact, when I learned back in the 70s, we learned by actually cutting down on this artery and exposing this artery and going in with our catheters.
Gotcha.
Which is much easier than it sounds, but it's not as easy as this. So patients who would be twice their ideal weight would have a huge risk of bleeding in their groin. Patients now who have artificial valves and are taking warfarin, instead of stopping the warfarin, having them take shots for 3 or 4 days before and 3 or 4 days after, so we can stick the groin and make it stop, we can do a transradial with patients fully anticoagulated. That's standard. So again, it's a lot easier. The advantages of it are reduced hospital costs. It's easier on the hospital, easier on the nurses, and the patients can move around. The patients can sit up. We are not in this country quite as cavalier, might be the word, as they are in Europe and Asia in letting patients just walk down to the cafeteria. There's no reason why we can't. We just haven't transitioned quite that much lately. When we look at blood vessel complications, in patients who are not obese, if you look at the red over here, this is the complication rate in patients who are not obese, femoral versus radial, complication rate obese, femoral versus radial, huge difference. And in fact, our complication rate radial is even lower than this now. It is actually close to zero. Looking at the cost of procedures, someone who has a bleed from the groin, incremental cost is about another $6,400 for the procedure, and this is something the hospital has to bear, and which is basically something that you all have to bear. In patients who have a bleed but don't have to spend an extra day in the hospital, it's still a lot of money. If they need a blood transfusion, it's a lot more money. This absolutely does not happen from the wrist. So from an economic point of view, it makes sense. As far as hospital charges go, overall hospital charges are less. These are hospital charges, not reimbursement charges. So it's $200 or $300, about 10% less to go from the wrist as opposed to the groin. And ultimately, any money that's saved is passed on to you as consumers, because the rates that you're paying are basically rates that are reimbursing everybody.
All right. Well, let's go to one more break, and then we're going to talk about, we're going to come back, and hope you're enjoying the show. A lot of wealthy information here for free. I love it. We'll be right back.